Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conflict Talk, the podcast supported by 60s Element. I'm your host, Giorgi Rizhvadze. In today's episode, we will be exploring one of the most complex and long-running issues in South Caucasus, the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict, recent US-brokered peace deal, and what the future might hold for the region. I'm very pleased to be joined by Shujaat Ahmadzada, a political analyst and researcher focusing on international security and South Caucasus. Shujaat, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Giorgi, for the invitation.
To start, let's set the scene. Many listeners may know the headlines about Nagorno-Karabakh, but not the deeper history. Shujaat, could you briefly explain the roots of the Armenia-Azerbaijani conflict and why Nagorno-Karabakh has been such a contested region?
It's a very hard question to start, but the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict, that could be described as such, has certain, let's say, I don't want to go in a chronological order and expose people, our listeners, with a lot of historical facts, but it could be argued that the first ethno-national question between Armenian and Azerbaijani ethno-states, nation-states, began in 1918, when, after the dissolution of the Russian Empire, the first time in the history of these two nations, distinct nation-states emerged in the name of Armenia and Azerbaijan, in the whims of collapsing empire. And when they emerged, they of course were modeled after very European and Western concept of a nation-state, meaning that for a state to exist, there needs to be national boundaries, which they didn't have because they were in the peripheries of an empire. And this in itself sparked a first ethno-territorial dispute between Armenian and Azerbaijani ethno-states, nation-states, in between 918 and 920 over various areas, including today's mountainous parts of Karabakh, today's Zangezur, or as it otherwise called Sunik, in Nakhchivan, which got interrupted by a sudden, very different and unexpected and unpredicted development that was the Azerbaijan's and followed then Armenia's takeover by Red Army. So Armenian and Azerbaijani Soviet Socialist Republic have been established, and the first task in front of the new socialist government, the communist government, was to finish the job that was attempted to finished 2 years ago. That is to create Armenian and Azerbaijani states and their boundaries. Of course, that was a hard task. There was a prior, warfare on that regard, and that also included Georgia to a large degree. And for that purpose, infamous or famous Caucasian Bureau, Kavkazsky Bureau, Kav Bureau, has been created with the goal of demarcating Armenian and Azerbaijani borders, which addressed three questions. The first, the status of mountainous parts of Karabakh. The second, status of Zangezur. And the third, status of Nakhchivan. In Nakhchivan, it was agreed that it should be kept as an autonomy within Azerbaijan, but with no territorial link to the mainland part. In Zangezur, it was agreed that it should be split into two. Majority Armenian part should be assigned to Armenia, and minority Azerbaijani part should be assigned to Azerbaijan. And in Karabakh, it was decided that mountainous part should be kept inside of Azerbaijan with a degree of autonomy. This is how the geographical impasse of the conflict has been transformed from many borderlands into the one area that is essentially Nagorno-Karabakh. This is how Nagorno-Karabakh got immersed in the scene. It was an administrative area within Soviet Azerbaijan. And then there was a long period of Soviet rule for 70 years, which began to shake in the late 80s, which led to the re-eruption of the interethnic clashes across Armenia and Azerbaijan. Within the very limited time frame, hundreds of thousands of people have been mobilized over ethnic lines, which is quite remarkable because for many years they were neighbors with no history of communal violence, but all of a sudden, as state entered its final phase, it's also elements of many disruption along the ethnic lines. So this is how the modern phase, quote unquote, of Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict got started with the Soviet dissolution, which led to the massive demographic violence just in the 4 years until the legal dissolution of the Soviet Union. Around 500,000 of Azerbaijanis and Armenians got expelled from their homes. 250,000 Azerbaijanis got expelled from Armenian SSR, and 300,000 Armenians got expelled from Azerbaijan SSR, with the exception of Nagorno-Karabakh. And when the Soviet Union dissolved, what was a latent and Cold War entered into basically active war, which is called nowadays as the First Karabakh War, which lasted until 1994, when Armenia emerged as a victorious party, took control of Nagorno-Karabakh and 7 surrounding Azerbaijani regions. There was a long period of by multilateral negotiations under the auspices of OSCE Minsk Group, which was made of Russia, France, and the United States, among many other countries, which definitely did not bring anything into the ground and led to recurrence of another series of violence ever since the 2010s. The biggest one being 2016 April War, which was the 4-day war, as it's called. Then it led to the 2020 war, the Second Karabakh War, in which basically results of the first war got reversed. Now Azerbaijan emerged as victorious and Armenia got defeated, which got legalized as a result of a Russian intervention in the form of trilateral ceasefire deal between Russia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. And aftermath, we had a series of very complex and very inconsistent and very also violent period in which we had a number of escalations basically in every year. In September 2020, in actually fall of 2021, then in September 2022, and September 2023, in parallel to Armenian and Azerbaijani accelerated efforts of diplomacy. So in this weird combination, we had, of course, this the big escalation of 2023 September, which led to complete Azerbaijani control over Nagorno-Karabakh and the secessionist entities' eventual liquidation, legally speaking, and also the mass exodus of Armenians from Karabakh into Armenia. But also at the same time, it triggered a complete shift in Azerbaijani-Armenian relations, as until 2023, Armenia and Azerbaijan were trying to achieve a political solution to the Nagorno-Karabakh question through largely foreign mediators and facilitators. But after 2023, in Yerevan and Baku, understanding born that Karabakh question is over and there is no need for multilateral framework, so they shifted to bilateral track, and which led to certain good progress in success in terms of results. For example, in December 2023, there was a Armenian-Azerbaijani first time ever bilateral deal to free up Armenian POWs, and Azerbaijan as a result hosted COP29. Then followed up April 2024, Azerbaijan and Armenia first time ever did a territorial compromise. Armenia returned 4 villages back to Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan also decided not to take part of areas to allow Armenia to control its roads. So what we see is that there is a complete shift to bilateral track, and now the latest development being is that so far we have basically 3 areas that are still need to be agreed upon. The first area covers this diplomatic relations, legal foundations of relations, which is formulated in the peace agreement, which has been drafted, agreed upon, and initialized, so it is completed. This is the first track. The second track is a border demarcation, so Armenian-Azerbaijani border has not been demarcated and delimited. The process is going on, and it will continue for decades, if not for many years. And the third one is connectivity, which was the big dispute between Armenia and Azerbaijan over the years, with no progress at site. And this seems to be moving forward also with regards to the Washington Declaration of August 8th, 2025, when United States facilitated a new modus operandi in the southern part of Armenia that would help to overcome this question. So far, it's practically not envisioned how it's practically going to look like, but there is this framework that Armenia and Azerbaijan agreed in.
Yeah, thank you for that overview from early 20th century to nowadays. So you mentioned the US brokered peace deal last month. What are the key elements of this deal, and what ways does it differ from past negotiation efforts? Can you make this distinction, and also what are the key elements of this deal?
In fact, there is no deal. It's just a declaration. Azerbaijan and Armenia decided on three things. The first is they reaffirmed the general principles for governing Armenian and Azerbaijani relations, which already happened in the form of a peace agreement. Then they agreed that they would initialize the agreement, but not signed yet. So agreement has not been signed, so there is no peace agreement. And the third thing was that they agreed on the general principles for connectivity route to be established. And the biggest symbolic part of it is that apart from the details, it's named tramp route instead of a corridor. So it's called a TRIP, which stands for Tramp Route for International Peace and Prosperity. Other than that, the content-wise, pretty much it builds upon what has already been agreed upon. So it is just a general framework of how Armenian-Azerbaijani relations are envisioned. So it's a declaration. It happened with the U.S. facilitation. It seems the U.S. is committed. U.S. wants to get committed into this deal by financial instruments, but so far there is no practical aspect of it that we see how it's going to be realized. So there is a deal. There's an understanding that Armenia should lease 44-kilometer of road to the United States in a joint venture agreement with the U.S. companies, and U.S. companies should help Armenia to rebuild this road because there is no road, and U.S. and Armenia will jointly control this road. Basically, that is just general framework, but how it will practically look like, no one knows.
Yeah. Also, the peace deals or the declarations, agreements are not about governments, right? Only because it also societies' response. How have Armenia and Azerbaijan and their societies more broadly reacted to these agreements and the deals or declarations in Trump declaration, let's say? How societies reacted in Azerbaijan and in Armenia?
I couldn't tell much about how Armenian society has reacted, but I think from social media one could understand that there is a bit of there's a mixed feelings of optimism on the one hand that it seems people want to believe that the war is over, basically war era is over. That is supported and that is cheered upon. But on the other hand, I think in Armenia there is a bit of skepticism on how this route will practically look like. So there is a bit of also huge degree of misinformation, disinformation around these topics. As Armenia, after the 2020 war, has entered into very polarized space, anything about a peace process or diplomatic relations or interaction with Azerbaijan and Turkey is a subject of extra manipulation and disinformation and misinformation. From that perspective, it is really hard to see what is the general societal feeling towards that. But that is up to Armenian analysts to say. I could only just observe as you could do. But from Azerbaijani perspective, in Azerbaijan, unlike Armenia, there is no polarization, and also the conflict has evolved in a way that there is no need for polarization. So there is nothing that makes Azerbaijanis dissatisfied or unhappy with basically any outcome. Even if not called Trump route or anyone else route, that would generally favor what most Azerbaijanis would prefer to see, that is, as uninterrupted connection with Nakhchivan. In fact, the thing is, this route the connection with Nakhchivan is also not something that is pretty much discussed in Azerbaijani society, even though it is quite important topic, because access to Nakhchivan is pretty much a problem. There is like 400,000 people living in this exclave. The only way to enter this exclave is either by air, which is technically and economically quite hard to do, because there is limited planes that are flying in and out of Nakhchivan from Baku, and considering the number of people living there, it's hard to find planes. And the second route that goes through Iran, and basically in the past 35 years, every single day this route was full of problems, either random or very harsh, pressurized, customs control by Iranian side, the long duration of traveling, and also a lot of problems on the customs. So in itself, in summary, traveling to Nakhchivan is a big problem. For an ordinary Azerbaijani, it is not a easily accessible thing to do. Does it concern all Azerbaijanis? No, because they don't know. But it concerns specifically Azerbaijanis that live in Nakhchivan or should travel to Nakhchivan. So from their perspective, there is a very big enjoyment, and they are very optimistic about these results. And what they want is that the road to Nakhchivan is reopened. In fact, there has always been a road through Armenia, which they used, but after the in the early 90s, this road became impossible to use because of the violent incidents that happened on the way. Now they're looking forward. Of course, some have security concerns. What will be the interaction with Armenian side? But I think if we have a clear, practical modus operandi could be presented to the society, then we could easily address those concerns as well.
Thank you for that. Of course, the signing any kind of deal or agreement is a one thing, and implementation is another one. So you mentioned some obstacles, of course. But my question would be, what do you see as the biggest obstacles to putting this peace agreement or deal into practice? And not only for Azerbaijan and for Armenia, but what are the obstacles coming from different players in the region as well?
For Armenia-Azerbaijan, the biggest obstacle is that this deals doesn't matter, Trump deal or anyone else deal or peace agreement. They are all realpolitik, highly, very much diplomatically negotiated deals that do not resonate with most of society. In case of Armenia, there is there is a high degree of skepticism, there is a high degree of mistrust. In Azerbaijan also, not surely distrust would be the same word that I would use, but still people are not participating in one or another in this wider discussion. So this deal is very narrowly crafted concepts, which are good to have because they prevent the war and they are also needed. But at the same time, we have to understand that there's very specific interventions in the form of deals, declarations, could not open up the doors of reconciliation and massive societal transformation if they are not backed up by local and grassroots level efforts of transformation. And that is the problem. So we have Armenian-Azerbaijani diplomats negotiating and agreeing upon text that basically does not resonate with most of the society. And how to overcome this is to make sure that the peace remains not as one document, but remains as a process in which every single aspect of every single segment of society participates in, from vulnerable populations to affected people, former displaced people, the people living on the borderlands, who will benefit it from most of this interaction, people with traumatized background, specifically because of the war and its results. I mean, there is a huge number of people who participated in this war in the form of combatants, veterans, martyrs, and their families. There has to be work done with them in order to make sure that this does not remain as a small group of diplomat negotiated format, but transform into societal and bilateral transformation in both countries. Of course, needs of Armenian society are different from that needs of Azerbaijani society, but there is also a bit of overlapping of interest. What unites Armenian and Azerbaijani societies nowadays is that in both societies there is a very widespread, almost consensus level feeling of war fatigue and apathy to the conflict. So because of wars actually, many wars and escalations and their human cost, both societies are fed up and tired of the conflict. So there is an apathy of war and there is a war fatigue, which does not necessarily mean being also pro-reconciliation, but at the same time it means being anti-war in the literal sense of the word, which is a momentum. So we never had this kind of societal dynamics that are equal in both countries, which should be used. I think for that to happen, we have to have a push for societal transformation in both countries. But also at the same time, the problem is that we're living in an environment, in a geographical environment where geopolitization of Armenian and Azerbaijani relations has always been a reality. Less in the past, more nowadays. So especially after the war in Ukraine, we see more and more increased rivalry between different global players. And that also definitely has a role and impact on Armenia-Azerbaijan relations. The biggest problem is that for many years, perhaps it has continued to be seen as a playground for external players to come in and determine their actions. Even, for example, not close countries geographically, I mean, but also the far away, like Pakistan, India, are pretty much involved in Azerbaijani-Armenian rivalry. India is quite supportive of Armenia. It has transformed arms just because it is in rivalry with Pakistan and believes that in the South Caucasus they should also do these things because they are in competition with Pakistan. And as a matter of fact, Pakistan also does the same to Azerbaijan. So you see how far away a rivalry becomes and ends up in Azerbaijani-Armenian context, which is definitely not something that helps Armenians and Azerbaijanis, but complicates the matters further. And that includes any other foreign rivalry that is exported to here. That includes Russia and West on the other hand, that includes the many others. So especially in this time of the period when we see very increased geopolitical confrontations in different fronts and different forms and shapes, Armenia and Azerbaijan could actually end up in being proxies of other hegemonic players. To avoid this, there is a space, and there is a possibility of avoiding this, and this avoidance has to happen through increasing and supporting bilateral track. So we have to also understand that there is a huge degree of mistrust between Armenia and Azerbaijan, institutionally speaking. Because, for example, from Azerbaijani perspective, one thing is quite clear. Nothing has been gained in the past, let's say, 35 years. Not nothing, but most of the things have not been gained through the negotiations, but through the war and external intervention. Why? Because of mistrust. So there is institutional mistrust, and this means that each side, every side, perceives the other side as a potential cheater. So Azerbaijan does not believe in the commitment of Armenia, and Armenia does not believe in commitment of Azerbaijan. And when you don't believe in the commitment of the other side, what you do is you go to vertical diplomacy. So you go for mediators in Moscow, Brussels, Washington, D.C., Beijing, or perhaps Kuala Lumpur, to ask your neighbor, to ask them that they tell something to your neighbor. So you don't do horizontal diplomacy with your neighbor, which is geographically just next to you, and you have to just talk directly. But you go to faraway Tokyo to ask, let's say Japanese for the sake of example, to tell Armenia or to tell Azerbaijan that you have to do the one thing or not to do the other thing. And that is a big problem. So for many 35 years, this is what was the case. OSCE, Minsk Group, and many other mediation platforms institutionalized this. Armenians and Azerbaijanis cannot talk to each other, so we have to be mediators. And now in the era of geopolitical confrontations, we have to understand that mediation is not a neutral concept. So we don't have a neutral mediators. We have every mediator, quote unquote, coming up with an agenda. And this agenda is not something definitely that doesn't help interests of Armenians and Azerbaijanis and Armenia and Azerbaijan. To avoid this, we have to support a bilateral track.
Thank you for that. So you mentioned the importance of social, cultural, or psychological or any other help the societies needs in Armenia and in Azerbaijan after the war, and it's really important to support not only ex-combatants but the citizens in general, and then the importance of bilateral relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan because of the geopolitical playground to not to have Armenia and Azerbaijan as a geopolitical playground. Thank you for mentioning that. So I read a lot of articles about it, and some observers view this agreement as a genuine step towards peace, while others remain kind of skeptical. And then you mentioned skepticism and the importance for the peace. So in your view, is it real foundation for sustainable peace, those agreements, or it's more of a temporary pause in the cycle of conflict? What's your observation on that?
Problem is that we see agreements as endpoint, but they should be a starting point. If Armenia-Azerbaijan process stops after this declaration, then of course this is a bad thing that happened. But if process continues, then I don't personally care about what kind of and under what name agreements that we have, because eventually we will be having a lot of agreements, and we have to have a lot of agreements, declarations, communiques, agreements. A lot of legal terms could be used. Problem is not in the amount or in the name of agreements. Problem is in the fact that whether we will be having a continued and sustained process of normalization or not. So far, the normalization is continuing with some episodical, let's say, backpedaling. It is continuing. Ever since 2023, we are on the bilateral track of normalization, where some success have been made, but some failures as well. But this is continuing. My urge is that we have to focus on how to continue this process and how to make it everlasting. And within this process, there could be many declarations, there could be many communiques, there could be many agreements, there could be many statements made by different kind of people, different kind of facilitators, and different kind of topics. What is important is to support the process. If process stops, then it means that the conflict did not evaporate but remains there, and there's a likelihood of returning to the violence, unfortunately. So from that perspective, what my urge is to just support the process. Whether I'm supportive of a Trump deal, Trump agreement, Washington Declaration or not, of course I'm supportive, because Azerbaijani-Armenian baseline is zero. So we never had any kind of interactions bilaterally. We never had any kind of deals in the past. Just 6 years ago, in 2019, if you asked me whether you could envision, practically speaking, an Armenian-Azerbaijani deal to be made, I would say you that I would reply you that even on a very basic thing, such as, let's say, very rudimentary thing, agreement was impossible. Like, even on a very basic, like rudimentary, childishly ridiculous thing, agreement was impossible. But now we have set of agreements on borders, on COP29, Trump deal, and many others. So definitely that is a big step, because the baseline was minus, now it is +5. But the vision that I want to see is that it doesn't remain in +5, but it goes to +100, 100, 150, and 200. So if we remain in +5 or +6, we will end up in a situation like Pakistan or India or Egypt and Israel ended up. That is a very narrow peace between two capitals, but rest of the society basically continue hating each other. No open borders, no communication, no interaction, and enemy image remains, enmity remains as a concept. Population hate each other, but you have only two capitals saying that, okay, we will not be fighting for some time. India, Pakistan is a great example. They signed a peace treaty, very long, very comprehensive one, in 1970, I think 3, if I'm not mistaken, Shindla Agreement. Ever since, they have been in numerous wars with each other. Why? Because peace remained as a concept for both capitals, New Delhi and Islamabad. Beyond that, beyond the capitals, it does not resonate much, because there was not work done. And if we envision Armenian and Azerbaijani peace as such, then of course rivalry will continue. And maybe not next year, but in 15 years we will be having another violence episode. To avoid this, there needs to be a very comprehensive, multifaceted, not only track 1, but also grassroots level reconciliation attempts. Not to be done only by states, but also by individuals, by different communities, by perhaps also some with the help of international actors.
Yeah, Shujaat, thank you so much for sharing this and your insights with us today. I think you helped us to better understand the complexities of the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict and the challenges after the peace building peace in South Caucasus, and it's very important for Georgia and for the region in general to have peace and sustainable peace. And as you mentioned, there is a need for local agency. There is a need for supporting those communities affected by war, not only, and the importance of bilateral relations. Thank you so much for being with us. And for our listeners, thank you for listening today's episode, and I hope you enjoyed. Please subscribe, share with others, and listen to our conversation about peace, conflict, and future for our region. Until next time, take care.